In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and he'd got 3 ships, and the money had come from the King and Queen of Spain, Isabella and Ferdinand.
For generations, Christopher Columbus has been a childhood hero. His enterprise has inspired our dreams and endeavours. His mission was to boldly go, and he did, sailing into the unknown to discover paradise. Columbus's world was medieval, racked by plagues and superstition. To the east, a new Muslim empire blocked Europe's trade route to Asia, and explorers like Columbus desperately sought a new one. But when he set off from southwestern Spain, his journey literally changed the world. He sailed west, forsaking the shelter of coastal waters favoured by his contemporaries. 33 fearful days later, he found not Asia, but a whole new continent. He was the first white man ever to set foot in Latin America.
An obsessively determined man, Columbus found 2 things: enormous wealth and riches that could be brought back, and a new continent. In the end, he knew that he had found a new continent, not just islands and not a passage to the west. And having found that new continent, which was settleable, it meant that the West, Western Europe, could spread first to that new continent, or those 2 continents, and then all over the world.
Columbus's achievement is going to be commemorated all over the Western world in August 1992, from Genoa to Seville, from New York to Mexico, and here in Liverpool, where they're planning to receive a flotilla of tall ships, which will by then have retraced the route of Columbus's first voyage of discovery across the Atlantic. But in the run-up to the celebrations, a bitter dispute has broken out between those who see Columbus as a great explorer and those who think of him as a colonial conqueror. The argument has exploded the Columbus myth, and now many different interest groups are fighting over the remains. The discoverer of America was the maker of Liverpool. The celebrations planned in the docks next year are a recognition of the wealth and development that followed Columbus's expedition.
The development, particularly of the North American continent, was a major attraction for those oppressed and disadvantaged of Europe to come through these very key sides. 8 million people in the space of 60 or 70 years left for the North America and found a new life, a new fortune, and changed the course of history by doing so.
But for the Indians who live in the Americas, Columbus is the man who enslaved their ancestors. When the local population was exhausted by hard labor and diseases from Europe after Columbus's death, Africans were imported to replace them. Packed into ships like animals, 20 million slaves were transported to work in the Americas over the next 3 centuries. Shackled and starved, only 1 in 10 survived the journey. Descendants of the original inhabitants of the Americas see little to celebrate in Columbus.
As a result of the colonization and civilization that the Western took with them, it was the destruction of our nation, the seize of our land, and the condemnation of millions of our people to misery and poverty. And that is the situation that we live today between the border of Chile and Argentina, in the worst land, with no resources, with no any right, human right.
Columbus's writings reveal a man of enormous ambition and pride. From his sponsors, the King and Queen of Spain, he wanted wealth and honor. From God, he claimed divine inspiration.
I gave them 1,000 pretty things in order to get their affection and make them want to become Christians. I hope to win them to the love and service of your highnesses and of the Spanish nation. Their majesties can see that I will give them as much gold as they need, and I will bring back as much aloe and as many slaves as they ask.
The King and Queen were pleased, Columbus became Admiral of the Ocean and Governor of Hispaniola, the richest of the Caribbean possessions. His statue still stands in Santo Domingo. Ana Kauna, a local Taino queen, clings to him. She welcomed Columbus, but he had her executed. And she was not alone. Historians estimate 500,000 were killed during his 2-year rule.
Columbus saw that the life of those Indians had something to offer in the way of personal liberty and freedom. And even though he enslaved and killed, he recorded his vision of their life. And that vision was taken up by thinkers and philosophers back in Europe. And in the end, it returned to the Americas in some of the ideas of the American Revolution and the American Constitution.
Such thoughts give little comfort to those who say they live with the legacy of slavery. Liverpudlians can walk through the city centre to Water Street, where slaves were once sold. Ships from this city once carried 40% of all African slaves traded by Europeans. The very fabric of the buildings here displays the paternal attitude bred by this terrible trade. Some people in Liverpool are appalled at the plans to commemorate Columbus, and already they're organising opposition.
Well, that's got a definite link with Columbus's discovery.
A lot about sort of the Americas prior to...
the Aztecs.
For Ray Costello and Adam Hussein, the tall ships arriving next year will not symbolise the wealth and development generated by trade with the Americas. They'll be reminders of the vessels that once carried their ancestors.
If we are told quite correctly that we should not forget what happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany, likewise we should not forget what happened when these European peoples went out and committed acts of genocide against those societies.
Well, I don't know that he was so irresponsible or so cruel, if that's what you're trying to get across. But there's no reason for me to want to defend that. Why should I want to defend it? Why should anybody 5 centuries later want to defend that type of activity, that type of human exploitation if it did take place?
Before he died, Christopher Columbus recorded his final judgment. While ill with fever on his last voyage, a voice from heaven spoke to him, and he set down the words.
The Indies, so rich a portion of the world he gave thee for thine own, and thou hast divided them as it pleased thee. For he gave thee the power to do so. He gave thee the keys, and thou was obeyed in many lands, and thou hast gained an honourable fame throughout Christendom.
In the Dominican Republic, Christendom is preparing a monument to Christopher Columbus. Next year, lasers from this structure will emblazon a crucifix in the sky to commemorate the famous navigator. But many doubt whether monuments alone will ensure Columbus the honourable fame he so desired. 20th century sensibilities smart too readily at what history tells us of this man.